Imagine a world consumed by war, cities reduced to rubble, millions dead. That was the reality of World War II, a conflict so massive it touched every corner of the globe. But how did it all begin? What were the events that led the world into such darkness? Our journey starts on a seemingly ordinary day in September 1939. The world watched in disbelief as German tanks rolled across the Polish border. This act of aggression, a blatant violation of international law, shattered any hope for peace. World War II had begun. The invasion of Poland was the spark, but the fire had been smoldering for years. To understand the full scope of this global conflict, we must journey back in time, to the ashes of a previous war. But that, my friends, is a story for another time. Stay tuned. The seeds of World War II were sown in the aftermath of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles, meant to ensure peace, instead fueled resentment and instability. Germany, burdened by crippling reparations and blamed for the war, became fertile ground for extremist ideologies. One such ideology was fascism, a dangerous mix of nationalism, militarism, and authoritarianism. In Italy, Benito Mussolini's fascist party rose to power, promising to restore Italy to its former glory. In Germany, a charismatic but deeply troubled veteran named Adolf Hitler preached a toxic blend of nationalism and anti-Semitism, capturing the hearts and minds of a disillusioned nation. Hitler's Nazi party, fueled by economic hardship and national humiliation, gained a stranglehold on Germany. Democracy crumbled, freedoms vanished. Germany, once a beacon of enlightenment, descended into darkness. The world watched with a mixture of apprehension and indifference. Few could imagine the horrors that would follow. After all, who could predict that a failed artist from Austria would plunge the world into chaos? As Hitler consolidated his power, he set his sights on expanding German territory. He reoccupied the Rhineland, a bold move that directly violated the Treaty of Versailles. This reoccupation was a significant step in Hitler's aggressive foreign policy, signaling his intent to challenge the post-World War I international order. Emboldened by the lack of resistance from France and Britain, he then turned his attention to Austria. In March 1938, German troops marched into Austria in a well-orchestrated annexation known as the Anschluss. This event was met with little opposition and even some enthusiasm from parts of the Austrian population. Hitler's ambitions did not stop there. He demanded the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia, a region with a significant ethnic German population. This demand was part of his broader strategy to unite all German-speaking peoples under the Third Reich. The Sudetenland crisis brought Europe to the brink of war, as Czechoslovakia was prepared to defend its territory. The world, still reeling from the horrors of the Great War, desperately sought to avoid another conflict. The memories of the trenches, the massive loss of life, and the economic devastation were still fresh in the minds of many. The collective trauma of World War I made the prospect of another war almost unthinkable. People across Europe and beyond were reading newspapers with growing anxiety, watching as Hitler's aggressive moves threatened the fragile peace. The policy of appeasement, championed by British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, aimed to prevent war by giving in to Hitler's demands. Chamberlain believed that by satisfying Hitler's territorial ambitions, a larger conflict could be avoided. This policy was rooted in the hope that Hitler's expansionist aims were limited, and that once these were met, peace would prevail. Chamberlain's efforts culminated in the Munich Agreement of 1938, where he and other European leaders conceded the Sudetenland to Germany. But appeasement was a dangerous gamble. It underestimated Hitler's ambitions and overestimated his willingness to abide by agreements. The policy allowed Germany to grow stronger militarily and strategically, as it continued to build up its armed forces and fortify its position in Europe. British newspapers were filled with headlines about appeasement, reflecting the divided public opinion on whether this approach would bring peace or disaster. It only emboldened Hitler, convincing him that the West lacked the stomach for a fight. Each concession made by the Allies was seen as a sign of weakness, encouraging further aggression. Hitler's confidence grew as he realized that his bold moves were met with little more than diplomatic protests. The parades of German tanks and troops were not just displays of military might, but also symbols of a regime that felt unstoppable. Chamberlain returned from Munich in 1938, waving a piece of paper and declaring peace in our time. This moment was celebrated by many who desperately wanted to believe that war had been averted. Crowds cheered Chamberlain, seeing him as a hero who had saved Europe from another devastating conflict. However, this sense of relief was short-lived. History, as we know, would prove him tragically wrong. Less than a year later, in September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, triggering the outbreak of World War II. The invasion was swift and brutal, showcasing the effectiveness of the German blitzkrieg tactics. Newspaper headlines around the world declared the start of a new and even more destructive conflict. The storm clouds of war were gathering and the world seemed powerless to stop them. The military buildup in the 1930s had created a tinderbox situation where any spark could ignite a full-scale war. Nervous crowds in European cities watched helplessly as their leaders struggled to find a way to maintain peace. The stage was set for a conflict that would redefine the 20th century. World War II would become the deadliest and most widespread war in human history, involving nations from every corner of the globe. The battles fought and the strategies employed would change the course of history forever. But before we delve into the heart of the war, we must first turn our attention to the East. The events unfolding in Europe were only part of the story. Across the globe in Asia, another series of aggressive moves were setting the stage for a truly global conflict. For while Europe teetered on the brink, events in Asia were already setting the stage for a global conflict. The Japanese invasion of China and the atrocities committed during the Nanjing massacre were harbingers of the brutal warfare that would soon engulf the world. The expansionist policies of Japan mirrored those of Germany, creating a parallel path to war in the East. Section 4. Lightning Strikes, Blitzkrieg, and the Fall of Europe. On September 1, 1939, the world watched in horror as German tanks stormed into Poland. This marked the beginning of a new and terrifying form of warfare that would change the face of Europe forever. Hitler unleashed his Blitzkrieg, a lightning war that combined tanks, planes, and infantry in a devastating symphony of destruction. This strategy was designed to create shock and disarray among enemy forces, overwhelming them before they could mount a coherent defense. Polish resistance crumbled under the onslaught. Despite their bravery, the Polish forces were no match for the speed and coordination of the German attack. Within weeks, Poland was divided and occupied. France and Great Britain, bound by treaty to defend Poland, declared war on Germany. However, their declarations were not immediately followed by significant military action, but their response was slow and hesitant. The Allies were unprepared for the speed and ferocity of the German Blitzkrieg, and their initial efforts to mobilize were plagued by indecision and logistical challenges. The horrors of trench warfare still fresh in their minds, they were ill-prepared for Germany's new style of mobile warfare. The memories of the Great War's stagnant, bloody battles made them cautious and slow to adapt. In the spring of 1940, Hitler unleashed his Blitzkrieg on Western Europe. This time, the targets were Denmark and Norway, followed by the Low Countries and France. Denmark and Norway fell in rapid succession. The swift and brutal nature of the attacks left these nations with little time to mount an effective defense. Then came the Low Countries, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Each fell quickly to the relentless advance of the German forces, their defenses overwhelmed by the speed and coordination of the Blitzkrieg. The mighty French army, once considered the finest in the world, was outmaneuvered and outgunned. Despite their reputation, they were unable to withstand the innovative tactics and sheer force of the German military. Within weeks, France itself lay defeated. The fall of Paris was a shocking blow to the Allies and a testament to the effectiveness of the Blitzkrieg strategy. The speed and ferocity of the German advance shocked the world. Civilians and soldiers alike were unprepared for the rapid changes in the front lines and the sheer destruction that followed in the wake of the Blitzkrieg. How could the seemingly invincible armies of Europe fall so quickly? The answer lay in a combination of factors, including the element of surprise, superior tactics, and the ruthless ambition of the German leadership. The answer lay in Hitler's ruthless ambition and the innovative tactics of the German military. The Blitzkrieg was a revolutionary approach to warfare designed to exploit weaknesses and create chaos among enemy ranks. But the story doesn't end there. The fall of Europe was just the beginning of a conflict that would engulf the entire world. While Europe was consumed by war, a sleeping giant was about to be awakened. The United States, initially hesitant to join the conflict, would soon be drawn into the fray, changing the course of history forever. Section 5. A date which will live in infamy: Pearl Harbor and America's entry. Across the Atlantic, the United States watched the unfolding events in Europe with a mixture of concern and isolationism. The nation, still recovering from the Great Depression, was wary of becoming entangled in another overseas conflict. The memories of World War I were still fresh, and the American public was largely in favor of focusing on domestic issues rather than foreign wars. Many Americans, scarred by the memory of World War I, believed that the United States should stay out of Europe's wars. The policy of isolationism was strong, with many advocating for neutrality acts to prevent the nation from being drawn into the growing tensions abroad. The sentiment was clear: America should avoid the horrors of war at all costs. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. The world was on the brink of monumental change, and the United States would soon find itself at the center of it all. The events that were about to unfold would alter the course of history forever. On December 7, 1941, the world changed forever. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the tranquility was shattered by the sound of explosions and the roar of aircraft engines. The attack was swift and devastating, catching everyone by surprise. Japanese aircraft, in a surprise attack, bombed the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The meticulously planned assault aimed to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet and prevent American interference in Japan's expansionist ambitions in the Pacific. The attack was executed with precision, leaving destruction in its wake. The attack, a calculated act of aggression, killed over 2,400 Americans and plunged the United States headlong into World War II. The devastation was immense, with battleships sunk, aircraft destroyed, and countless lives lost. The nation was in shock, and the call for retribution was immediate. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan, declared President Franklin D. Roosevelt in his address to Congress. His words resonated deeply with the American people, galvanizing the nation into action. With those words, America's isolationist stance evaporated. The attack on Pearl Harbor unified the country in a way that few events could. Citizens from all walks of life rallied together, driven by a newfound sense of purpose and determination. The nation was ready to face the challenges ahead. The sleeping giant had awakened. The United States, once hesitant to engage in global conflicts, now mobilized its vast resources and manpower for the war effort. Factories shifted to wartime production, and young men enlisted in droves, ready to defend their country and its ideals. But the road ahead would be long and arduous. The United States faced the daunting task of fighting a war on two fronts, in the Pacific against Japan and in Europe against the Axis powers. The challenges were immense, and the sacrifices would be great. The United States, thrust into a global conflict on two fronts, faced an enemy unlike any it had encountered before. The battles would be fierce, and the cost in human lives would be staggering. Yet the resolve of the American people remained unshaken. The fate of the world, it seemed, hung in the balance. The outcome of the war would determine the future of nations and the course of history. The United States, now fully committed to the fight, would play a pivotal role in shaping the post-war world. The journey ahead was fraught with peril, but the spirit of a united America would prove to be an indomitable force. Section 6. The Tide Turns D-Day and the Liberation of Europe. By 1944, the tide of the war began to turn. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union, after enduring unimaginable losses, began to push back against the German invaders. In the West, American, British, and Canadian forces prepared for a daring invasion of Nazi-occupied France. On June 6, 1944, under the cover of darkness, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, France. D-Day, as it came to be known, was the largest amphibious invasion in history. Facing fierce resistance from dug-in German defenders, Allied troops fought with incredible courage and determination. The liberation of France was a long and bloody slog, but the Allied advance, fueled by American industrial might and the unwavering spirit of the French resistance, proved unstoppable. Paris was liberated in August 1944, and the road to Germany lay open. But victory, as we shall see, came at a terrible price.